Welcome to What's Trending Now, a tutorial developed by the East Cadre of Transition Leaders. At the beginning of every school year, it's important to identify what's trending in the world of education. This tutorial will provide practical tips for secondary educators on what's trending now regarding Transition IEP compliance and Quality Transition IEPs. This tutorial will provide you a quick review of Transition Assessment Summary, Post-Secondary Goals, Annual Goals, Transition Services and Activities. So grab your smartphone and log into Snapchat for your update. Selfies are still #1 for transition age youth. And just like a selfie that can tell you a lot about a person, a Quality Transition IEP should tell the story of the student. How clear is your Transition IEP Selfie? If a new teacher reads an IEP which you have written, he should have a clear picture of the student's unique strengths, interests, preferences, and needs for all 3 post-secondary goal areas: employment, education and training, and independent living. IDEA and Article 7 require that the Transition Assessment Summary include a summary of the student's strengths, interests, preferences, and needs for employment, education and training, and independent living, if applicable, in each Transition IEP. This information is assessed and summarized each year. Many teachers struggle knowing how transition information is carried over into the actual IEP document. So before we begin, let's have a quick review of where in the IEP we are referring to. Yes, it's all about the form. A common question is, where do I put it in the IEP? In the left-hand column, you will see a list of questions that must be answered in a compliant and quality IEP. The column on the right shows where that information should go in an IEP. Please press the pause button to read the screen to yourself. When you have completed it, push play to go on to the next slide. Just as the last slide on All About the Form, please press the pause button to read the screen to yourself. When you have completed it, push play to go on to the next slide. Now that you know where the information belongs, let's take a look at the content in a bit more detail, starting with transition assessments. There are some teachers in Indiana who are still struggling with transition assessments and understanding how and when to assess students. Let's look at assessment in a bit more detail. Take a look at your smartphone or tablet. How many apps have you downloaded that are doing virtually the same thing? Just like your phone, you don't need to administer multiple transition assessments that assess the same information. If a teacher doesn't understand the transition assessment requirements, she tends to conduct multiple assessments trying to make sure everything is covered. That practice is not necessary. Remember, you don't need 10 apps on your phone to do the same thing, nor do you need 5 assessments that are all giving the same information. I know, right? You may get all the information needed from one assessment, or it may take 3, but there is no point administering multiple assessments that all look at the same thing. You are required to assess each year the student's strengths, interests, preferences, and needs for employment, education and training, and independent living if applicable. Before moving on, there is just one more thing you should remember about transition assessments. #TransitionTip. Guidance counselors, educators, or groups may be doing an activity which could be documented as an authentic assessment, or teachers may be conducting career assessments as part of a general education class. Get copies of these documents and include in the summary of transition assessments. Once the assessments are conducted, a summary of the results is written in the IEP. Each year, educators are required to assess and summarize each student's unique strengths, interests, preferences, and need for post-secondary employment, post-secondary education or training, and post-secondary independent living if applicable. There are 2 key points to reiterate on this slide. You must assess and summarize the results. Simply providing all of the responses from a worksheet is not a summary. There must be a summary for employment and education training each year. Independent living must be assessed and summarized in the first Transition IEP, and if it's determined a post-secondary goal is not needed, a new assessment does not need to be done in subsequent years. Instead, the independent living summary would be revisited to ensure accuracy, and that original summary is included in the IEP. If a student does need a post-secondary goal for independent living skills would need to be assessed each year. Now that the assessment is completed, students must identify their post-secondary goals. Transition age youth have a lot of decisions to make and plan for as they move into adulthood. These long-term goals are captured in the IEP as post-secondary goals for employment, education training, and independent living. As you begin writing these goals in the IEP, you must remember to write measurable post-secondary goals. Just like blocking an outspoken cousin on Facebook, there are some words that you must block from being included in your post-secondary goal statements. Statements that are non-measurable terms will be non-compliant. Here are some examples of what many non-measurable goals start with that you must block. I might, I am thinking about, I am considering, I will decide later, I am uncertain. Remember, it is not necessary that you quote a student verbatim on the post-secondary goal. Restate the goal to the student using a measurable statement and confirm it is correct rather than writing down a direct quote that uses non-measurable language. Writing a measurable post-secondary goal is as simple as completing an I will statement. Remember, the post-secondary goal for employment may be the long-term goal after college, such as I will be a nurse, I will be a teacher. By the way, independent living is more than just where a person lives. All of the activities shown are considered independent living skills and could be focused on for a post-secondary goal for independent living. If this is a new concept for you, review the Tuesday's tip on post-secondary independent living goals from September 22nd. That was random. You must remember to check if the IEP makes sense. When reading a transition IEP, do the post-secondary goals align with the transition assessment summary? The post-secondary goals should be based on the information contained in the transition assessment summary. If the post-secondary goal seems to have come out of nowhere, the transition assessment summary and the post-secondary goals are not aligned and the IEP is non-compliant. Not only are measurable post-secondary goals required, but in case you missed it, a measurable annual goal is also required for a compliant transition IEP. An annual goal should be based on data from the present level, pass the stranger test, clear and concise, identify a specific skill related to the student's disability that must be taught or learned to be successful in the general education classroom, be measurable, and identify the frequency of measurement. Sometimes IEPs contain annual goals that are not goals at all. An annual goal should focus on a specific skill which is needed for the student to be successful in the general education curriculum. Look at this bulleted list. None of these are annual goals. If any of these were to be the only annual goal of an IEP, the IEP would be non-compliant. Remember, do not write annual goals for skills that you have no control over, such as attendance, homework, and assignment completion. These are symptoms of a skill deficiency. What's causing the student to not complete assignments? Is it a lack of organization, time on task, or something else? That root cause should be the focus of the annual goal. Wait, Before you go, there's just one more area of the Transition IEP you need to know about for a compliant and quality IEP. This is the area of transition services and activities. Transition services and activities are the individualized activities the school will support the student to experience during the effective dates of the IEP to help the student work towards achieving his or her unique post-secondary goals. Here are a few tips to remember when writing a transition IEP. On IIEP, use the narrative box to explain why a specific activity is important to that specific student. School staff must be listed as facilitating transition services and activities. The activity could occur in a general education class, such as preparing a resume, learning interviewing skills, or having a job shadow. Any elective class related to the student's post-secondary goal is a transition service and activity such as art, band, welding, weightlifting, or health careers. Activities outside of school may be debriefed by the teacher with the student, such as a college visit or volunteering. This activity then may be included as a transition service and activity. This was a quick tutorial, but there are many resources you may want to access to strengthen your transition IEPs. Check out the Indiana Secondary Transition Resource Center's website at instrc.indiana.edu. There are specific resources that you will want to familiarize yourself with, such as the Transition Assessment Matrix, Transition Rubric, and Tuesday's Tips. The website also contains free online training as well as recorded webinars, such as the webinar on authentic assessment, which was mentioned in this tutorial. If you need additional assistance, contact your local district's cadre of transition leaders member. If you do not know who that person is, ask your local special education supervisor or special education director to identify who is appointed to the cadre from your district. You may always contact the Center on Community Living and Careers with specific questions or suggestions on resources. You may email cclc@indiana.edu. Thanks for watching and have a great year.